Welcome to the DHH Insight series. We will be talking today about quality report writing made practical for DHH school personnel. My name is Kelly Dunham, and I'm one of the DHH education consultants on the team at Michigan Department of Education, Resource for Deaf and Hard of Hearing. This year's DHH Insight series has 3 parts: collecting data that matters for DHH learners, which is available on our video library already, and practical strategies for writing effective IEP goals, which will be coming soon. All 3 parts will be available on our video library following the live webinars. As school personnel, we know that writing clear, accurate, useful reports can be time-intensive and complex. We spend hours and hours pouring energy into drafting reports that describe students' background, their summary of medical records, performance on assessments, and present levels, all while trying to balance data points with strengths-based language that is able to be understood by everyone at the IEP table. Sometimes, if you're like me, that feels a little bit like juggling one too many items when maybe you've never learned to juggle in the first place. So if you identify with any of that, I just want you to know that you are in the right place. We hope that today's webinar will provide some practical tools and strategies to help educators streamline the report writing process while maintaining high standards as we focus on ways to professionally and effectively communicate student data, progress, and recommendations. So let's dive into practical strategies for quality report writing. I'll give you just a brief moment to review the learner objectives for today's webinar, which are listed on the screen before you. Before we dive into practical strategies, I always like to begin with the why. Why report writing matters. Data is the foundation of special education, and most often it's presented in written reports. Some of the most common reasons why report writing matters are legal compliance. Our responsibility is to write reports that are legally defensible. Those reports clearly link data to conclusions. They reflect professional judgment or informed clinical opinion. And they need to hold up to review, audits, or in the event of a due process. Legal compliance also ties into team decision-making because reports drive decisions. Reports are not just documentation. They lead directly to eligibility determinations, supports and services, and IEP goals, as well as placement decisions. If something is not clear in a report, it's not going to be clear in the decision-making process. Another piece of this is shaping instruction, because well-written reports inform on present levels, they will guide goal development, and overall support the instructional planning. A third reason why report writing matters is that reports are primarily a communication tool. Reports help families and teams understand the student's strengths and needs, to share a common understanding across disciplines, and lastly, to build trust through clarity and transparency. For many families, the report that they receive, the eligibility report, is the first and sometimes the most lasting impression from the evaluation team. IEPs and/or reports may be the only information that a general education teacher is provided with in order to support a student with special needs. There are additional reasons why report writing matters, but these are some of the most commonly referenced factors that we wanted to highlight today. As one way to share insight with the field, our office strives to highlight guidance documents that already exist on topics. So first, we're going to look at some of the formal guidance documents that exist and highlight requirements in report writing. Although formal guidance documents on the topic of overall quality report writing is quite limited, there are resources, such as the ones listed on the screen, to provide guidance about what is required. And those include the special factors for DHH in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Also, the eligibility criteria from the Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Ed for Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And lastly, the present level of academic achievement and functional performance, or PLAF statements. So we're going to walk through those three requirement pieces of guidance really quickly before we get into some practical strategies. This slide may look really familiar to you if you joined our previous DHH Insights webinar on collecting data that matters for DHH learners. It is shared again today as one of the pieces of guidance that exists, and really because it outlines the types of considerations that must be made and reported on through the IEP process. The second guidance that we want to highlight is MARS language about eligibility, specifically for deaf and hard of hearing. When we look at DHH eligibility and the requirements, MARS language says that there must be two things. First, a diagnosis of any type or degree of hearing difference that interferes with development or adversely affects educational performance. And second, an evaluation by a multidisciplinary evaluation team, or MET team, including input from an audiologist and an otolaryngologist or otologist or ENT. The final formal guidance that we have to highlight today is the present level of academic achievement and functional performance from Michigan Department of Ed. PLAFs are a type of writing that formal guidance is available for. This guidance spells out the requirements of what a PLAF statement should include. Just as a recap, those three pieces of information that should be included are baseline data and data sources, a description of area and sub-area of need, and lastly, the adverse impact. All of this information must be individualized, and that's not new to you, but there is no one-size-fits-all. Everything that is reported on must tie back to student strengths and needs. In Michigan, special education is guided by federal law, which is the IDEA, and state requirements, but many implementation decisions are made at the local level. Districts and ISD have flexibility in how they develop procedures, implement evaluations and services, and, drum roll please, write reports. There is no single statewide template for all practices. Local control within our state allows districts to meet student needs while aligning with local systems. So, our guiding question today, what makes a quality report? When we talk about a quality report, it's important to recognize that quality isn't a single or fixed standard. What makes a report high quality depends on its purpose, its audience, and the decisions that it's meant to support. A quality evaluation report looks different than a quality progress report. And both of those documents might look different across different districts. What stays consistent is this: a quality report is clear, defensible, and useful for decision making. So rather than aiming for one perfect report, our goal is to write reports that effectively meet their intended purpose. So let's talk about the purpose or the end goal of different types of reports that fall within the scope and practice of DHH school personnel. The screen before you has some of the different types of reports that you may or may not be familiar with. Our goal today is to highlight different types of reports and truly how the end goal of the report really has to drive the writing to make it a quality report. So, walking through the examples on this screen, let's talk about the multidisciplinary evaluation team report, or the MET report. The primary purpose of this report is to determine eligibility for special education and related services. Therefore, MET reports should answer the referral question or questions by providing data across domains and linking findings to eligibility criteria. Re-evaluation reports might be another type that we have to write. The primary purpose of a re-evaluation report is to continue, change, or exit eligibility. Therefore, this type of report should address if any changes have occurred and if the student continues to meet eligibility criteria. Another type of report are the PLAF statements. The primary purpose of a PLAF is to describe current functioning. And these statements should address the question of what does the student need to access learning and or the curriculum right now, and always include that baseline data, the functional impact, and incorporate the student's strengths and areas of need. Progress reports are another type of report. The primary purpose of a progress report is truly to measure progress towards IEP goals. Progress reports should address the key question of, is the student making meaningful progress by outlining growth over time? Some other types of reports that you may or may not be familiar with are manifestation determination reports. The primary purpose of this is to determine the relationship between a behavior and an area of disability. Through objective behavioral data and the impact of disability, teams must determine if there is a link or lack thereof, clearly supported by data. A dissenting opinion report is primarily for the purposes of documenting a professional disagreement. This type of report provides transparency for documenting when a data-supported disagreement exists between IEP team members. Another type of report is an independent educational evaluation, or IEE. The primary purpose of an IEE is an independent perspective that will either confirm or outline a reconsideration of previous findings. So as you can see from all the examples shared here, and there are more that we could go on about, the end goal is really what we have to focus on and making sure that we're writing a clear and quality report. As we've shared before, formal guidance on the topic of writing quality reports is quite limited. So when there's not a playbook for something, the next best thing is to focus on practical strategies. Professional protocols is the first practical strategy that we want to talk about today. First and always, follow your district and ISD policies and procedures. As we have established, the minimum requirements of what must be in certain reports comes from that federal and state guidance. But individual ISDs and or districts likely have policies and procedures in place. If you are unsure about the policies and procedures, we encourage you to contact your supervisor or administrator to follow that chain of command and get access to those documents. If you work in multiple counties or districts, there may be different district policies or procedures in different places. So ask for copies of those. Sometimes the more challenging piece of working in multiple locations are the unwritten norms that a particular building or a district has. As a former itinerant teacher myself, I know that one practical strategy I did was trying to align myself with the special education chairperson or the lead teacher in a building or district to kind of glean those building or district norms. And this goes beyond report writing, because we know that asking questions early may prevent issues later. Professional protocols support consistency, clarity, and shared responsibility. The second strategy that we want to talk about today is anchoring report writing to the purpose and decision-making that will come from the report. Practical ways to do this are, first and always, identify the purpose of the report. The purpose will guide the type of decisions that the team needs to make. The data from the report should drive the conversations at the IEP table and therefore inform the services and supports that are written into that document. It is always important to prepare, but not predetermine. Have options and recommendations ready to present and discuss at the IEP team meeting. But always be willing to make adjustments based on the conversations that happen at that table. Some of this happens more organically with practices such as whiteboard IEPs or other methods that teams are using to make an IEP a conversation rather than a document to review and agree to at the table. Regardless of how your district or ISD runs IEP meetings, writing reports with the mindset that these are recommendations for the team is always considered best practice. The image on the slide that you're seeing now depicts quantity versus quality, and I'll give you just a moment to take a look at it. We know that excessive amounts of data can make documents difficult to navigate. It can distract from the actual needs. And there's a chance that it can create redundancy or misinterpretations. Too much data can be a real problem. This is why anchoring to the purpose and decisions that need to be made can support our report writing. The report should be a clear roadmap, not a filing cabinet of all the available data. The third strategy to highlight today is using professional judgment. Quality reports can absolutely include professional judgment or your informed clinical opinion. Part of that may come through when you're synthesizing data from multiple sources. For example, we know that when standardized assessment scores are based on determining a basal and ceiling, the impact of not having access to language, regardless of the mode of communication, can be a real factor for our DHH learners. It's our job to describe trends and patterns that exist in data not just simply report the scores. Interpreting data with a DHH lens is one way to connect findings to overall educational impact. Another key highlight when using professional judgment is to avoid speculation or subjective information, and rather focus on the observable and objective data that you have. Narrative report writing does have a place, but it makes a difference when it's most effective when it's supported by data. The fourth strategy today that we want to talk about is writing for the intended audience. Know your audience. Some key highlights for this strategy are not assuming that those reading the report have the same prior knowledge as you. It is very common for DHH school personnel to be the only one at the IEP table who have the understanding of the educational impact of hearing differences, which is why it's also important to use plain language before using acronyms and explain any technical terms. In the field of DHH, simple clarifications such as sensory neural implies permanent, or explaining what is a signal to noise ratio, or even what is the purpose of an assessment, are things that can help clarify why this information matters in the educational setting. We cannot assume that people have that knowledge. The next slide is actually going to highlight some examples of using clear, specific, and accurate statements to improve the readability for all team members. The slide before you kind of help brings together using that professional judgment and that observable, objective information rather than vague or subjective data in a way that supports the readability for all team members. Catching that vague phrasing in our own writing can actually be one of the most difficult things to catch. Because we know what we meant to say. If I use the statement, the student is friendly and motivated by attention from peers, what I meant to imply is that the student uses appropriate age-level greetings and social language with peers. And so you can see the examples on the screen from the Pacer Center, which is a resource for parents, kind of outlines how to take some vague phrases and make them more specific. And as I mentioned, this can be very difficult to look at your own writing and determine if something was vague or specific because you know what you meant. But again, thinking about your intended audience and is it readable to everyone at the team, not just those who have your same background knowledge. This screen highlights an example of plain language that supports effective communication. So there's an example of before and after. This example specifically comes from Exceptional Lives, which is a nonprofit service supporting families and educators of children with disabilities. On their website, exceptionallives.org, they offer examples of using plain language to support effective communication. The example on the screen specifically highlights the strategy of defining acronyms, but their website also talks about reducing the mental load of reading complex information. We're going to take a look at that next. Go ahead and take a look at the screen. If you were unable to make out the information on this, That was intended, that was on purpose. This is a visual example, again, that comes from Exceptional Lives to highlight the complexity of reading content with a high mental load. You may be able to decipher that the text on the screen is meant to read if it is determined that the student is eligible for an individualized education program. The next step is to prepare for the meeting during which the evaluation results will be discussed and the IEP will be developed. If this visual example helped you or gave you an aha moment, I invite you to check out Exceptional Lives to take this example from their website and use it with whomever you feel led to do so with. Another practical strategy that we want to share today is using consistent and transparent structures for writing. This might refer to a template if you use a report template, which we're going to talk about in some upcoming slides. But using section headings will help navigate a report and make it helpful for all team members. Following the structure of your IEP system can also help team members follow along. And keeping the formatting predictable can make interpretation of the data easier to locate. Whoops. Skipped a slide, sorry about that. Another strategy is using your peers to review and following ISD and district norms, just as another practical strategy for quality report writing. Take time to compare reports within your team or your district, whether that is at a consultant level meeting or a small group of DHH school personnel that you're connected with, but take time to share examples of clear and effective reports or glean ideas from those around you. Ask yourself the hard question of, would this make sense to someone new? Or would this make sense to someone who has never worked with a child who is deaf or hard of hearing? Using those clear examples can help support effective report writing. When we think about accessibility of our reports, regardless of what type of report, providers should keep in mind the overall presentation of the report. If you've sat in an eligibility meeting where providers have taken turns reading this 15-page, unified or team report that everyone is so proud of because they've poured hours and hours and hours of their life into, but they sat at the table and they read it word for word, you know that presentation matters. The overall delivery can be supported. You might find it beneficial to prepare or prioritize some talking points before the meeting. In addition to keeping formatting standards similar as what was already discussed, consider the reader accessibility of your report. And what I mean by that is we write reports for students who are eligible for special education services. And sometimes the adults who are reading these reports have disabilities or needs for accommodations that we may or may not be aware of, but it is something to keep in mind as we're writing. None of this is meant to downplay writer autonomy or individual style, but rather to allow professional judgments in how reports are written while maintaining the shared standards for clarity, compliance, and defensibility. In addition, some teams or ISDs may have style guidance or standards to follow. This might include avoiding certain fonts that are just not compatible with screen readers or just in general tricky to read. If you use pictures or visual data in a report, you could consider adding alternative text or a written description of what the image is depicting. So this might be true for an audiogram or a signal to noise image. Additionally, using a consistent and the most recent version of logo or branding for the ISD or school district might be preferred. If you're unsure about any style guidance that might exist in your district or ISD, be sure to ask. In preparing for this talk today, I did have conversations with several individuals from the field who are using web-based tools to help support their presentation of reports. And those examples, they really range all the way from, uploading a report with all of the personally identifiable information removed into AI to suggest edits, to using AI to put something at a readable level for 3rd through 5th grade, or even to uploading a report into PowerPoint and creating a presentation with, the top 5, 6, 10 takeaways from the entire team. And there are so many other options than just those ones that I've highlighted. We live in a time when tools and resources and technology are rapidly changing. So rather than identifying specific sources that you could use for these strategies, we suggest leaning into the teams that you already work with and focusing on upholding the policies of your employer when it comes to web-based tools. In a field where many of us work as a county of one, utilize things like the DHH swap meets and other groups of providers that you're connected with to learn and grow from each other. Accessible reports are not just written, they are designed, delivered, and understood. We mentioned templates earlier. So on the screen before you are some sections of a template that you might consider. Again, recognizing that every single IEP system is different. My biggest suggestion is to follow the outline of your IEP system, whether that is for a eligibility report, for an IEP, etc., to kind of build your template. But you can use this screen and the topics there to think about different headings that you might include. The screen, sorry about the image, it's kind of small, shows a snapshot from MIPSE, which is Michigan Power School Special Ed. And it's a screenshot of their PLAF writing section. And I share this with you because it is one example of an IEP system. So before you start a report template or maybe tweak one that you already have, I encourage you to look at your IEP system and let the layout of that system drive how you build a template. This is true for eligibility reports, PLAF statements, etc. When I was working as an itinerant service provider, I used collaborative team reports with most of the locals that I worked with. But I also developed my own Google document to use for PLAF statements because we've all been there where you are live typing in the IEP system and you've just typed the most beautiful, comprehensive, quality PLAF statement and it didn't save it. So one thing that you can consider is typing all of that ahead of time in your own document that you have kind of built a template from that follows the exact flow and boxes of your IEP system. So I know I've worked in systems where it looks identical to this, but I've also worked in places that use a different IEP system where the PLAF statement was broken down into 3 separate text boxes. And so knowing that system can help you build a template to improve your report writing. Regardless of how the system is broken down, that federal guidance tells us what a PLAF statement has to include. And so that's why we've highlighted some of those guidance documents at the beginning of this presentation, because the content doesn't change, but sometimes the way things are written might look a little different. So to recap, the foundations of quality report writing here are a few takeaways. Quality reports are purpose-driven. They are not one size fits all. There is no single required template for effective reports. Rather, they are shaped by their purpose, their audience, and the decisions that they are meant to inform. The next key takeaway is that data should guide decisions, not overwhelm them. Use your professional judgment to present clear, relevant data that drives the IEP discussions while avoiding excess information that kind of distracts from the student's needs. And lastly, follow policy, use practical strategies, and write things that are accessible. And what we mean by that is adhere to your district and ISD procedures, prepare recommendations for team discussions, and ensure that reports are clear, consistent, and accessible to all readers. Lastly, know that the MDE RDHH team is here and available as a resource to you. You can visit our website, and you can see that on the screen there. Whether you're looking for, a quick answer to a question, or you'd like to fill out an outreach support request to schedule something more formal, a virtual meeting, or an in-person visit for experienced teachers and new teachers alike, check out our events page for information about events for school personnel, families, and students. If you're not already subscribed to our weekly event updates, I encourage you to subscribe for that. And if you're not familiar, check out our brand new Facebook page. It's our hope today that every single person viewing this webinar can identify at least one piece of information that you will improve in your future report writing. We invite you to just take a brief moment to reflect on your thoughts and prioritize one insight that you will turn into action.